The dust settled around her worn boots as Emma stepped off the stagecoach, her single carpetbag clutched tightly in trembling hands. The Montana Territory stretched endlessly before her, a sea of golden grass beneath an impossibly wide sky. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston, each mile taking her further from everything she knew and closer to a future she could barely imagine. She was 23 years old and had never been more than 10 miles from her childhood home until last month. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like divine intervention when she'd read it in the cramped boarding house where she worked endless hours for barely enough to survive.
Seeking respectable woman for marriage.
Ranch in Montana Territory.
Honest work, honest man.
She had written back with shaking hands, her carefully practiced script revealing nothing of her desperation or her dreams. Now, standing in the small frontier town of Copper Ridge, she searched the weathered faces around her for the man who had signed his letters simply as J. Callahan. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a reminder that she had bet everything on a stranger's promise.
Miss Emma Patterson.
The voice was low and careful, like someone speaking to a skittish horse. She turned and found herself looking up into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall and lean, his face tanned from endless hours in the sun, with dark hair just touching his collar beneath a brown cowboy hat. He held the hat now, turning it slowly in work-roughened hands.
Mr. Callahan.
Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Just Callahan. Or James, if you prefer. He offered a slight smile that softened the hard planes of his face. Your journey was long, she admitted, and he nodded as if he understood everything contained in that single word. The ride to his ranch took 2 hours, the wagon bouncing over rutted roads while James pointed out landmarks and neighbors' spreads. He spoke simply about the land, the cattle, the work that filled his days from sunup to sundown. Emma listened and watched the country roll by, so different from the cramped streets and brick buildings of Boston that it might as well have been another world entirely. The ranch house surprised her. She had expected something rough and temporary, but the structure before her was solid and well-maintained, with a wide porch and windows that caught the afternoon light. James helped her down from the wagon, his hands careful and brief at her waist. It's not much, he said, though she could hear the quiet pride beneath his words. But it's honest and it's paid for. The land is mine, 300 acres, and the herd is growing each year. Inside, the house was sparse but clean, with handmade furniture and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. James showed her through the rooms, his explanations growing more hesitant as they approached the single bedroom. He stopped in the doorway, not entering. I want you to understand something, he said, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected directness. The Reverend can come tomorrow or next week or next month. There's no rush. You can have the bedroom, and I'll sleep in the loft until you're ready. Until you're sure. Emma felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. She had been terrified of this moment, of expectations she might not be able to meet, of demands from a man who was still essentially a stranger. I appreciate that, she managed. That night, lying alone in the comfortable bed with quilts that someone had stitched with care, Emma stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie night. Above her, she could hear James moving quietly in the loft, settling in for sleep. She thought of the boarding house where she had shared a room with 3 other women, their beds so close together they could hear each other breathe. She had never had privacy, never had space, and certainly never had an entire room to herself. The days developed a rhythm. Emma rose early and learned to cook on the wood stove, to make bread that didn't burn, to prepare meals that would sustain a man through long days of physical labor. James was patient with her mistakes, never complaining when the biscuits were hard or the coffee was weak. He taught her about the ranch, showed her how to collect eggs from the chickens, how to tell when the weather was changing by reading the sky. They talked in the evenings after supper, sitting on the porch as the sun painted the world in shades of gold and crimson. James told her about building the ranch from nothing, about his dreams of expanding the herd, about the harsh winters and the miracle of spring. Emma shared carefully edited stories of Boston, of her family lost to fever, of the years of work that had nearly broken her spirit. Why did you advertise for a wife? She asked one night, the question that had haunted her since she first read his letter. James was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening land. Gets lonely out here, he said finally. I'm good at the work, always have been. But a ranch needs more than one person to make it truly live. And I suppose I wanted someone to share it with. Someone to talk to when the day is done. Someone to make it feel less like surviving and more like living. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The Reverend came to town once a month, and the date approached when they could marry if they chose. Emma found herself watching James as he worked, noticing the careful way he handled the animals, the quiet competence of his movements, the rare but genuine smiles that transformed his serious face. He was kind without making a show of it, strong without being harsh, honest in ways that made her trust him more each day. But the question remained unspoken between them, growing larger as the Reverend's visit drew near. It was James who finally raised it, coming in from a day of mending fences to find Emma kneading bread at the kitchen table. He washed his hands in the basin, dried them slowly, and then turned to face her. "The Reverend will be here on Sunday," he said.
"You need to know what you want, Emma."
"I won't push you, and I won't hold you to anything if you want to leave. I can give you money for the stagecoach back east, and no one needs to know anything about why you came here." Emma's hands stilled in the dough. Her heart was racing, but not with fear this time. She thought of the boarding house, of the years stretching ahead in gray monotony, of never having anything of her own or anyone to share her days with. She thought of James, of his patience and his kindness, of the way he looked at her like she was something precious even when she burned the supper. She thought of this house, this land, this life they were building together one careful day at a time. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "If you'll still have me." James crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just in front of her. "Emma," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up into his face. "I would be honored to have you as my wife." Sunday came with clear skies and warm sunshine. The Reverend performed the ceremony in the small church in Copper Ridge, with 2 ranchers' wives serving as witnesses. Emma wore her best dress, cleaned and pressed, with wildflowers James had picked that morning. He wore a clean shirt and looked nervous in a way she had never seen him. When the Reverend pronounced them married, James kissed her carefully on the cheek, and Emma felt the finality and the rightness of it settle into her bones. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, but as they approached the house, Emma felt her nervousness return. James seemed to sense it. He helped her down from the wagon and stood looking at her in the afternoon light. "Emma," he said gently, "I meant what I said before. There's no rush. You can still have the bedroom, and I'll stay in the loft until you're ready. Marriage is just a piece of paper. The rest, the real parts, those take time." Emma looked at this man who had given her a home, who had been patient beyond measure, who asked for nothing but offered everything. She thought of her fear and her loneliness, and how both had slowly transformed into something else during these weeks on the ranch. She took a breath and met his eyes. "I've never shared a bed," she said, the admission costing her something. "I don't know how to be a wife in that way. I'm scared I'll disappoint you." James reached out slowly and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Then share mine forever," he whispered. "And we'll figure it out together. No expectations, no disappointments. Just 2 people learning to build a life." Emma felt tears sting her eyes, but they weren't tears of fear. They were something else entirely, something that felt almost like hope. She squeezed his hand and nodded. That night, they climbed the stairs together to the bedroom that would now be theirs. James was gentle and patient, never rushing, always making sure she was comfortable. He held her as if she were precious, and for the first time in her life, Emma felt truly safe. She fell asleep in her husband's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, and knew that she had finally found home. The years would bring challenges, harsh winters and dry summers, lean times and prosperous seasons, losses and joys. But they would face them together, 2 people who had started as strangers and built something real from patience and trust and quiet affection that deepened into love. Emma never regretted her leap of faith onto that stagecoach, never looked back with longing at the life she'd left behind. She had found something better than she'd ever dared to dream, there on the Montana prairie with a cowboy who had whispered a promise and then spent every day keeping it.